I was lying under a mosquito net in the middle of nowhere, drunk, broke, and completely alone, staring at a weak flicker of light from a dying torch, while the night pressed in from every direction. And that's when my phone lit up with a single bar of signal, just enough to remind me that somewhere out there was a world I had just lost, a life that had slipped through my fingers without warning. And instead of doing what any normal person would do, calling for help, reaching out, trying to fix things, I opened a game, a stupid, simple game that had once been a harmless part of my marriage. And in less than a minute I made a decision that would become the pettiest, most meaningless, yet strangely satisfying revenge of my life. Because a few years earlier my life had looked stable from the outside. I had a wife, an apartment in Europe, routines that felt permanent, small habits that gave structure to our days. The kind of relationship where nothing seemed obviously broken, yet something subtle was always shifting beneath the surface. And one of those things was competition. Not loud or toxic at first, but quiet and constant, woven into everything we did. From board games to card games to something as ridiculous as step counts. We had a whiteboard in our living room that didn't track groceries or reminders but wins and losses. Who was ahead, who needed to catch up, turning even the smallest activities into battles we never officially acknowledged as serious. But deep down, we both cared more than we admitted. I remember times when she would go out for something simple, like picking up dinner, and I would check the step count app and see she was ahead. And instead of letting it go, I would start pacing, then jogging, then practically running laps inside the apartment just to get ahead before she came back. And when she returned and checked her phone, her expression would shift from neutral to confused to slightly impressed and slightly annoyed. And I would just sit there, trying not to look out of breath, pretending it was nothing. And that was us, always pushing, always competing, always trying to stay one step ahead. And for a long time it was fun. It gave us energy, something to laugh about, something to bond over. Late nights in front of a glowing TV with half-finished drinks and snacks scattered around while we played whatever game had captured our attention that week. Talking trash, celebrating tiny victories like they mattered. And somewhere along the way, one game became our unofficial battlefield. Angry Birds. A game so simple it should have meant nothing, but somehow became everything. We tracked scores, compared rankings, noticed immediately when the other person pulled ahead. And neither of us would admit how much it mattered. But we both knew it did. I would wait until she fell asleep and then quietly open the game, replay levels, reclaim my spot. And in the morning, she would check and give me that look, that half smile that said she knew exactly what I had done. And then she would do the same, staying up late to beat my score. And it became this silent war, a loop we never broke out of. And looking back now, I realize something we didn't at the time. When everything becomes a competition, you stop noticing. When something stops being a game, you stop realizing. When real life starts slipping through the cracks. And eventually, you're not playing together anymore, you're just trying to win. And by the time everything fell apart, I wasn't even home. I was in Zambia working on a community project in a place where electricity wasn't guaranteed and signal was something you chased rather than expected. Where every moment of connection was temporary and unpredictable. And that's where I was when my phone buzzed one afternoon, sitting outside as the sun started to dip and the air cooled slightly, and I picked up my phone and saw her name. And for a brief moment I smiled, because even after everything, I still felt that automatic warmth when I saw her name on my screen. And then I opened the message and everything changed. It was short, cold, precise, no build-up. No explanation, just an ending delivered through text. A digital goodbye sent across continents. And I remember reading it again and again, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something else if I stared long enough. But they didn't. And before I could even process it, the signal dropped, and I was left sitting there with nothing but the weight of what had just happened. No chance to call, no chance to argue, no chance to understand. Just silence. And I wish I could say I handled it well, but I didn't. Not even close. That night I drank. Not casually, but heavily. The kind of drinking that isn't about enjoyment, but about drowning out the noise in your head. And the thoughts came any louder, sharper, every memory replaying with a different tone. The good moments feeling distant, and the bad ones suddenly more important. And eventually that sadness turned into anger. And anger doesn't stay quiet. It pushes you to act. And when I got a brief moment of signal, I started sending messages, at first questions, confused and hurt, asking how she could end things like that, asking why there was no conversation. But quickly, those messages turned into something else. Accusations, frustration, things I knew even as I typed them, that I would regret. But I sent them anyway, one after another, each one pushing things further past the point of repair. And when she finally responded, it wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry, it was practical. She froze our joint bank account. And suddenly, the situation went from emotional to real. Because in that environment, not having access to money wasn't an inconvenience, it was a problem that affected survival. Getting to an ATM already required effort, and even then there was no guarantee it would work. And now, even if everything lined up perfectly, I had nothing. And I remember sitting there realizing that whatever chance existed of fixing things was gone. Not because of her message, but because of my reaction. Because I had taken something painful and made it worse. And that realization didn't hit all at once. It settled slowly, like something sinking. And that night felt endless, the air thick and unmoving, as I lay under that mosquito net with only a flickering torch for light. My mind replaying everything over and over, thinking about what I could have done differently, what I should have said, how things might have gone if I had just paused instead of reacting. But those thoughts didn't change anything. And eventually, the alcohol dulled everything enough for me to start drifting. And just before I passed out, my phone buzzed again. One bar of signal, just enough to reconnect me to everything I had just lost. And I stared at it, thinking about who I could call. But there was no one who could fix this, and definitely not her. After everything I had said, and without really thinking, I opened Angry Birds, maybe out of habit. Maybe because it was the last connection it still had to something familiar. And when the game loaded, I saw her profile, her scores higher than mine, her progress ahead. And in that moment, something shifted inside me, dramatically, but quietly. A realization forming that while I had lost everything else, I still had access to this one shared space. This one account she had never thought to separate, and suddenly that small, insignificant thing felt like the only place where I still had any control. And that realization didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt calm, almost cold. Like a switch had flipped somewhere deep inside me. Because in a situation where everything had been taken away without warning, where I had no closure, no control, no ability to change the outcome, here was something small, something trivial, but still within my reach, and my hands hovered over the screen as the signal flickered in and out, reminding me I didn't have time to overthink this. That whatever I was going to do had to happen now. And I knew exactly what I was about to do. Not because I had planned it, but because it made immediate, emotional sense. In that moment, it wasn't about fixing anything or getting her back or even making a real impact. It was about taking something back, anything. And I navigated through the settings, found her profile, paused for just a second, not out of hesitation, but awareness, because I understood that this was petty, that it wouldn't change the bigger picture, that it wouldn't undo what had happened, but it would create a moment, a reaction, something that would break the feeling of complete helplessness. And I pressed delete, confirmed it. And just like that, everything she had built in that game, all her progress, all her scores, all the small victories that had once been part of our shared life, disappeared instantly. No warning, no recovery, no way to undo it, just gone. And I stared at the screen, expecting some kind of feeling, anger, satisfaction, regret, something strong. But what I felt instead was quiet, like a release of pressure that had been building all day. And then I realized I wasn't finished. Because I didn't want her to think it was a glitch or some random error. I wanted her to know it was me, that this wasn't chance, it was intentional. So I changed the username slowly, typing through the haze of alcohol, making sure each letter registered before moving to the next, crafting a message that was simple and direct, something that didn't require explanation, something she would understand immediately. And when I saved it, I looked at the screen for a moment, taking in what I had done, and then the signal dropped again, cutting me off from everything just as quickly as it had reconnected me. And I put the phone down and closed my eyes. And for the first time since the message, since the drinking, since everything spiraled, my mind went quiet, not peaceful, but empty, like there was nothing left to process in that moment. And I don't know how long it took me to fall asleep, but when I woke up the next day, the reality was still there, unchanged. She was gone, the relationship was over, and nothing I had done during that night had altered that outcome. Life didn't suddenly make more sense. There was no closure waiting for me, just the slow process of moving forward, whether I was ready or not. And over time, things did change. I stopped drinking. I rebuilt routines. I created distance between who I was then and who I became later, but some memories stayed. Not the dramatic ones, but the small, quiet moments. The competitions that used to define our daily life. The way we turned everything into a game. The laughter that came from something as simple as beating each other's scores. And sometimes I think about that version of us. Not the ending, but the middle, when things felt lighter, when winning was still fun instead of symbolic. And I wonder at what point it shifted. At what point the competition stopped being harmless and started reflecting something deeper, something neither of us addressed. And I don't pretend that what I did that night was meaningful or mature, because it wasn't. It was small, petty, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But in that moment, it felt like control, like reclaiming a tiny piece of something I had lost completely. And maybe that's what makes it stick in my memory, not because it was important, but because of what it represented at the time. A reaction to feeling powerless, a way to create impact in a situation where I had none. And I've thought about how she might have reacted when she eventually opened the game, expecting to see her progress, her scores, the evidence of all those small victories, and instead finding nothing. A blank slate and a message that made it clear this wasn't random. And I don't know if she was angry or amused or just indifferent. Maybe she rolled her eyes and moved on. Maybe it annoyed her for a moment, and then she forgot about it entirely. And the truth is, it doesn't really matter, because that moment wasn't about her. It was about me trying to process something I didn't know how to handle. And years later, I'd see that more clearly. That revenge, especially the small kind, isn't about justice or balance. It's about emotion. About creating a response when you feel like you've been left with nothing. And if I could go back, I probably wouldn't do it again. Not because it caused some huge consequence, but because it didn't really solve anything. It just filled a moment. And yet at the same time, I understand why I did it. Because when everything falls apart without warning, when you're left alone with no control over how things end, even the smallest action can feel like reclaiming something. Like proving to yourself that you still exist in the story, even if only briefly. And maybe that's why I don't regret it as much as I probably should. Because it wasn't about hurting her in a meaningful way. It was about breaking that feeling of being completely powerless. And in the end, that's what stayed with me, the act itself, but the realization behind it. That sometimes the things we do in our lowest moments aren't about logic or long-term consequences. They're about survival, about finding a way to feel something other than loss. And while I don't think she misses me, not the way I occasionally think about those moments we shared, I know that at some point she saw it. That blank screen, that message, that tiny piece of revenge. And for a brief second, our lives crossed again. In that strange, indirect way. And maybe she felt something. Maybe she didn't. But for me, it marked the end of something that had already been over. Just in a way that felt, for a moment, like I had some say in how the final page looked. And that's the strange thing about revenge. Especially the small, petty kind. It doesn't change the story. It just changes how you remember your place in it. And sometimes, when you've lost everything else, that's enough.